For the past year, the story surrounding the WNBA has sounded almost too perfect. Record-breaking television ratings, packed arenas across the country, social media buzzing about women's basketball in a way we've never seen before. After decades of slow growth, it suddenly feels like the league has finally broken into the mainstream. To many fans, this looks like the beginning of a golden era. Sponsors are paying attention, networks are investing more coverage, and the league is attracting millions of new viewers who had never watched a WNBA game before. On the surface, everything points to a league that is finally reaching its long-awaited breakthrough moment. A huge part of that momentum has been linked to the arrival of a generational talent, Caitlin Clark. Her long-range shooting, electric style of play, and massive college following helped turn ordinary regular season games into must-watch events. Suddenly, the WNBA wasn't just growing, it was exploding into the spotlight. But while fans see the highlights, the sellout crowds, and the rising popularity, something else is quietly unfolding behind the scenes. Because rapid success can create pressure just as quickly as it creates excitement. As the league grows, questions about money, power, and control are becoming impossible to ignore. A new collective bargaining agreement is on the horizon, and with it comes a massive debate about salaries, revenue sharing, and the future direction of the league. Reports and commentary from analysts suggest that not everyone inside the system agrees on how that future should look. Some voices believe the moment calls for aggressive demands and major change. Others worry that pushing too far could risk the momentum the league has only just begun to build. And that's where the real story begins. Because what looks like the greatest success story in women's sports might also be the start of its most complicated internal battle yet. Everything about the WNBA's sudden surge in popularity can be traced back to one moment, the arrival of Caitlin Clark. Before she ever stepped onto a professional court, Clark had already built one of the largest followings women's basketball had ever seen. During her college career, millions of fans tuned in just to watch her launch deep three-pointers from distances that looked almost impossible. Her games regularly drew television audiences that rivaled major men's sporting events, something that had rarely happened in women's basketball before. When Clark finally entered the WNBA, the effect was immediate. Arena tickets started disappearing within hours of release. Cities that had never sold out games suddenly had fans lining up outside the doors. Television networks began highlighting matchups featuring Clark as must-watch events, and social media clips of her shots spread across the internet within minutes of every game. But the numbers told an even bigger story. Broadcast ratings climbed dramatically, with several games featuring Clark becoming some of the most watched regular season WNBA games ever recorded. Merchandise sales followed the same trend, with jerseys and team gear flying off shelves as new fans rushed to support the rookie phenomenon. For the league, it felt like the breakthrough moment people had talked about for years. Sponsors started paying closer attention. Major brands began exploring new partnerships with teams and players. Media outlets that previously gave the league limited coverage suddenly placed it in headline conversations. In short, the WNBA had something every sports league desperately wants, but rarely gets: a true mainstream attraction capable of bringing millions of new viewers into the game. But sudden success can sometimes create unexpected pressure. Because when one player becomes the center of attention, it naturally shifts the balance of the spotlight. Some veterans suddenly found themselves sharing a stage with a rookie who was drawing more cameras, more headlines, and more attention than anyone before her. For many fans, this was simply the next step in the evolution of the league. New stars arrive, the sport grows, and the audience expands. But behind the scenes, the sudden shift in attention began raising deeper questions about influence, recognition, and the direction of the league itself. And that tension would soon collide with something even bigger: the negotiations that could reshape the future of the WNBA. For years, the financial conversation around the WNBA looked very different than it does today. The league was respected for its talent and competitiveness, but the business side of the sport was still developing. Revenue growth was steady, yet it moved at a much slower pace compared to some of the major men's leagues. But the last few seasons changed that conversation dramatically. Suddenly, the WNBA wasn't just growing, it was attracting serious financial attention. New sponsorship deals began appearing. Television networks showed increasing interest in broadcasting games, and reports about long-term media rights agreements started circulating throughout the sports industry. The shift was impossible to ignore. Attendance numbers began climbing across the league. Merchandise sales started breaking previous records. Even casual sports fans, people who had never followed the WNBA before, were tuning in to see what all the excitement was about. Much of this momentum was linked to the wave of attention surrounding players like Caitlin Clark, whose popularity helped bring an entirely new audience into the sport. But once those viewers arrived, something important happened. They didn't just watch one player, they started paying attention to the entire league. That growing audience suddenly made the WNBA far more valuable as a business product. Brands began exploring partnerships with teams and individual athletes. Networks realized that certain matchups were capable of drawing massive viewership numbers, and league executives started talking about expansion opportunities and long-term investment in the sport. For the first time in its history, the WNBA appeared to be entering a period where its financial future could look very different from the past. But whenever money enters the conversation, so does a new set of questions. Players began looking closely at the league's growing revenue and asking how those profits should be shared. If the sport was entering a new era of popularity, many believed it was only fair that salaries and benefits reflected that growth. At the center of those discussions was the role of the Players' Union, the Women's National Basketball Players Association, which represents athletes during negotiations with the league. And that's where the stakes suddenly became much higher. Because the moment money started flowing into the league in a bigger way, the conversation shifted from simple growth to a much larger debate about power, influence, and who truly benefits from the WNBA's new success. And those questions would soon lead directly to one of the most important negotiations in the league's history. Behind all the excitement surrounding the WNBA's recent surge in popularity, a major decision is quietly approaching, one that could shape the league's future for years to come. At the center of that decision is the next collective bargaining agreement, commonly known as the CBA. This agreement is essentially the rulebook that determines how the league operates financially. It sets the structure for player salaries, revenue sharing, benefits, travel conditions, and many of the protections players receive throughout their careers. Negotiations for the next deal will take place between the league and the Players' Union, the Women's National Basketball Players Association. And with the WNBA experiencing its biggest surge of attention in decades, the stakes of these negotiations have suddenly become much higher. For years, WNBA players have openly discussed the need for better financial opportunities within the league. While many athletes earn solid salaries compared to average workers, their earnings are still far below those in larger professional leagues. Because of this, many players spend their off-seasons competing overseas in international leagues to supplement their income. But now that the WNBA is experiencing rapid growth in television ratings, sponsorship deals, and attendance, many players believe the league has entered a new era. If the business of the sport is expanding, they argue that player compensation and benefits should grow as well. That's why the upcoming CBA negotiations are being viewed as a potential turning point. Players want improvements in several key areas. Salary increases are one of the most obvious demands, but the conversation also includes topics like better revenue sharing, stronger retirement benefits, improved housing arrangements, and continued upgrades to travel conditions across the league. In recent seasons, the WNBA has already made some progress, such as the introduction of charter flights for teams, which had long been requested by players. But many believe those changes are only the beginning. At the same time, negotiations like these are rarely simple. League owners must consider the long-term financial sustainability of the sport. While revenue is growing, the league is still in a period of development compared to other professional leagues that have operated for decades with much larger financial ecosystems. This creates a delicate balancing act. Players want their share of the league's success. Owners want to ensure the league continues to grow in a stable way. And both sides know that the outcome of these negotiations could influence everything from future expansion to the league's overall financial structure. But as these discussions continue, reports and commentary suggest something even more complicated may be happening behind the scenes. Because not everyone within the players' union appears to agree on the strategy moving forward. From the outside, professional sports unions often appear completely unified. Fans usually see players standing together, supporting the same statements, and presenting a single message to the media. But behind closed doors, negotiations can be far more complicated. And according to several commentators and analysts, that may be exactly what's happening right now within the Women's National Basketball Players Association. While the union publicly represents all players in negotiations with the league, reports and discussions in the sports media world suggest there could be different perspectives inside the group about how aggressively the next deal should be pursued. Some voices believe this is the perfect moment for players to push for major financial changes, especially with the league gaining popularity and attracting new fans. From that perspective, the argument is simple. If the league is entering a new era of growth, then players should fight to secure their share of that success right now. Waiting too long, some believe, could mean missing the best opportunity to reshape the financial structure of the league. But not everyone is believed to see the situation the same way. Other players are reportedly more cautious about pushing negotiations to the brink. Their concern isn't necessarily about whether salaries should increase, it's about the potential risks that come with high-stakes labor disputes. Sports history has shown that strikes and lockouts can disrupt momentum, sometimes pushing fans away from a league at the worst possible moment. For players who rely heavily on their WNBA income, the possibility of a work stoppage can be especially concerning. While star players may have endorsement deals or international contracts, many athletes depend on their league salaries as their primary source of income. This creates a complicated dynamic inside any players' union. Some members may be comfortable taking a hard stance if it leads to long-term financial gains. Others may worry that pushing negotiations too far could lead to consequences that affect everyone in the league. It's important to note that much of the discussion around these internal disagreements remains speculation based on commentary from analysts and media personalities. The union itself continues to present a united front publicly. But even the possibility of differing opinions highlights how complex these negotiations can become. Because when a league experiences rapid growth, the question isn't just how to share the rewards, it's how to balance opportunity with risk. And as the WNBA moves closer to these critical negotiations, the tension surrounding that balance may only continue to grow. While the headlines often focus on star athletes and league executives, there's another group in the WNBA whose future could be most affected by the upcoming negotiations: the middle-tier players. These are the athletes who form the backbone of every team. They may not always dominate national headlines or sign massive endorsement deals, but they play critical roles on the court. Many of them earn respectable salaries by normal standards, yet their financial reality looks very different from the superstar level of professional sports. For many of these players, their WNBA salary is only part of their yearly income. During the off-season, A large number of athletes travel overseas to compete in international leagues. Those overseas contracts often help them supplement their earnings and provide financial stability throughout the year. But that system comes with its own challenges. Playing year-round basketball can take a serious physical toll. Athletes must travel constantly, adjust to different countries and leagues, and often have very little time for rest between seasons. For years, players have spoken about how demanding that schedule can be. That's one reason why the upcoming negotiations involving the Women's National Basketball Players Association are so important. Many athletes hope the next agreement could create better financial opportunities within the WNBA itself, allowing players to rely less on overseas leagues. However, as discussions about potential labor strategies circulate, some analysts and commentators have suggested that not every player feels the same level of comfort with the risks involved. A prolonged dispute, strike, or lockout, while still uncertain, could mean an entire season without league salaries. For players who rely heavily on those paychecks, even a short interruption could create serious financial stress. Reports and commentary have suggested that this concern may be particularly strong among players who do not have major endorsement deals or long-term financial security. For them, the conversation around negotiations isn't just about principles or long-term change, it's about stability. And that's where the tension begins to grow. Because while some voices around the league argue that this moment represents the perfect opportunity to push for major improvements, others may be quietly wondering whether the risks could outweigh the potential rewards. As the debate continues, these players find themselves caught directly in the middle of a complicated situation, one where the future of the league, their careers, and their financial security are all tied to decisions that are still unfolding behind closed doors. And the next factor in this story may be even more unpredictable: the fans themselves. For years, the WNBA had a loyal fan base that supported the league through steady but gradual growth. Those fans followed the teams, knew the players, and stayed invested even during seasons when national attention was limited. But the last year introduced something the league had never experienced before: a massive wave of brand new viewers. Much of that surge followed the rise of Caitlin Clark, whose transition from college basketball to the professional level drew millions of curious fans into the league. People who had never watched a WNBA game suddenly found themselves tuning in, buying tickets, and discussing matchups online. The result was a dramatic shift in the league's audience. Arena attendance jumped in multiple cities. Television broadcasts started reaching audiences that previous WNBA seasons rarely achieved. Even social media engagement exploded, with highlights, reactions, and debates spreading across platforms within minutes of games ending. But the most interesting part of this new audience is how different it appears from the traditional fan base. Many of these viewers didn't arrive because they had followed the league for years. Instead, they were drawn in by specific moments, storylines, or individual players that captured their attention. For some fans, it was the excitement of watching long-range shooting and fast-paced games. For others, it was the drama surrounding rivalries, rookie performances, and rising stars. In other words, the new audience is still forming its connection with the league. And that creates an important question for the future. When a sports league experiences sudden growth, maintaining that audience becomes just as important as attracting it in the first place. Fans who discover a new sport during a moment of excitement may continue watching for years, but only if the momentum continues. If that momentum slows down, the situation can change quickly. History has shown that professional sports leagues can lose viewers during major disruptions such as strikes or lockouts. When games stop, fans often turn their attention to other sports or entertainment options. And once that habit changes, bringing those viewers back can be difficult. That's why the WNBA's current situation is so unique. The league has never had this level of national attention before, and the fan base is still expanding. At the same time, the negotiations and discussions happening behind the scenes could influence whether that momentum continues or faces unexpected challenges. Because in the end, every sports league depends on one simple factor: the fans who decide whether the games are worth watching. As negotiations and discussions continue around the WNBA's future, another layer of conversation has begun circulating throughout sports media and online communities. Beyond the financial debate, some commentators believe the situation may also involve deeper questions about influence, leadership, and the shifting dynamics inside the league. To be clear, many of these discussions remain speculative. Reports, analyst opinions, and online debates have raised theories about possible tensions, but much of it has not been confirmed by the players or the league itself. Still, the conversation has gained attention because of how dramatically the WNBA landscape has changed over the past year. For many seasons, the league's identity was shaped by its veteran stars, players who helped build the sport during years when national attention was far more limited. These athletes carried the league through periods when television coverage was smaller, arenas were quieter, and the path toward mainstream recognition seemed uncertain. Now, however, the spotlight has shifted rapidly. With the rise of new stars like Caitlin Clark, the league has suddenly entered a new era of visibility. Television ratings have jumped, social media discussions have exploded, and the WNBA is reaching audiences that were previously outside its traditional fan base. Some analysts have suggested that this rapid change could naturally create tension inside any professional league. When the spotlight shifts, so do the conversations around leadership, recognition, and influence within the sport. Certain commentators argue that these dynamics are simply part of the evolution of a growing league. As new stars emerge and the audience expands, the structure of the sport often changes with it. Roles evolve, media narratives shift, and players adapt to the new landscape. Others, however, have speculated that the current labor discussions may also reflect broader questions about who shapes the future direction of the WNBA. Is the league entering a new era led by a younger generation of stars, or will veteran voices continue to guide the league through its next phase of growth? Again, much of this remains theory rather than confirmed fact. What is clear, though, is that the WNBA is experiencing one of the most transformative moments in its history. Rapid growth often brings opportunity, but it can also introduce new challenges that leagues must navigate carefully. And as negotiations continue behind closed doors, the balance between financial demands, player unity, and the league's evolving identity may ultimately determine what the next chapter of women's professional basketball looks like. As negotiations move closer, one question is beginning to dominate the conversation around the league: what actually happens next? The truth is, there are several possible outcomes, and each one could shape the future of the WNBA in very different ways. The most optimistic scenario is also the simplest. The league and the Women's National Basketball Players Association could successfully negotiate a new agreement that satisfies both sides. In this situation, players would secure improved salaries, better benefits, and stronger financial protections, while the league continues building on its recent surge in popularity. If that happens, the WNBA could enter what many fans believe is a long-awaited golden era. With growing television audiences, expanding sponsorship deals, and the continued rise of new stars like Caitlin Clark, the league could capitalize on its momentum and attract even more viewers in the coming years. But negotiations are rarely that simple. Another possibility is that talks become prolonged or tense. Labor discussions in professional sports often involve months of back-and-forth negotiations, with both sides trying to secure the best possible terms. In that scenario, the season could continue as normal, but uncertainty might linger while both parties work toward a final deal. Then there is the outcome that many fans and analysts hope to avoid: a work stoppage. A strike or lockout is not guaranteed, but it is always a possibility during high-stakes labor negotiations. If talks break down completely, games could be delayed or even cancelled until an agreement is reached. That kind of disruption has happened in other professional sports leagues throughout history. When seasons are interrupted, the consequences can stretch far beyond the players and team owners. Arena workers lose shifts. Television networks lose programming they scheduled months in advance. And perhaps most importantly, fans lose the chance to watch the sport they've been excited about. For a league experiencing one of the fastest growth periods in its history, that risk becomes even more significant. The WNBA's recent surge in popularity has brought millions of new viewers into the sport. If the league can maintain that momentum, it could continue expanding its audience for years to come. But if that momentum is interrupted, there's always the possibility that some casual fans might drift away. That's why the upcoming negotiations are so important. Because the decisions made in these meetings won't just determine salaries or contract terms, they could influence the entire direction of the league's future. Right now, the WNBA finds itself standing at one of the most important crossroads in its history. For years, the league worked steadily to build a stable foundation. Players, coaches, and executives pushed forward even when national attention was limited. Slowly but surely, the sport grew stronger, building a loyal fan base and creating opportunities for the next generation of athletes. But over the past year, everything accelerated. Television ratings jumped. Arenas filled with fans who had never attended a WNBA game before. Social media exploded with highlights and debates about the league. Much of that momentum followed the rise of exciting new stars, including Caitlin Clark, whose arrival brought an entirely new audience into women's professional basketball. For the first time in decades, it feels like the WNBA has truly captured mainstream attention. And yet, moments like this often come with complicated challenges. As the league grows, expectations grow with it. Players want to ensure they are fairly rewarded for helping build the sport. The Women's National Basketball Players Association is preparing to negotiate terms that could reshape salaries, benefits, and long-term financial opportunities for athletes across the league. At the same time, league leadership must balance those demands with the reality of maintaining sustainable growth. Expanding a professional sports league requires careful planning, long-term investment, and the ability to keep fans engaged year after year. That's why the upcoming negotiations are so significant. If both sides reach an agreement that strengthens the league while rewarding the players who helped elevate the game, the WNBA could enter a new era of stability and prosperity. The surge of new fans could continue growing, and the sport might finally reach the level of cultural influence many supporters have envisioned for years. But if negotiations become too tense or momentum stalls, the league could face challenges at a moment when the spotlight is brighter than ever. In the end, the future of the WNBA may depend on how carefully the league navigates this turning point. Because opportunities like this don't appear often in professional sports. The question now is simple, but incredibly important. Will this moment become the beginning of the WNBA's greatest era, or the start of a much more complicated chapter in its history?